All right, panelists, we are now live on Zoom and you can turn your cameras on. Hello, everybody at home. I see lots of folks coming into the Zoom. This is Standing Up for Student Solidarity with Palestine, featuring Pink Floyd's Roger Waters. Good afternoon, everyone. Bienvenue tout le monde. A big welcome to everyone. Welcome to those of you at home tuning into our conference featuring Pink Floyd's Roger Waters. Also, thanks to the members of the press who are joining us today. Welcome Roger, welcome Sarah from McGill. Also welcome to Benoit, who will be with us shortly from the CSN's Central Council of Metropolitan Montreal, who will be offering a brief word of solidarity from the Labour Federation. So bienvenue Roger, Sarah, et Benoit. Hi Roger.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. So my name is Bianca Mageni, and I'm with the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, who are the host and organizers of today's event. Bonjour tout le monde. I'm with the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute. Je représente l'Institut Canadien des Politiques Étrangères, and you can find out more about our work at foreignpolicy.ca. The Institute is based in Montreal, or Jojage, which is on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka people and the keepers of the eastern door of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. We also recognize the continued presence of the Métis, Innu, and Inuit people on this land. I also want to thank our co-sponsoring organizations, Solidarity for Palestinian Human Rights, or SPHR, at McGill, Just Peace Advocates, and PAJU, as well as our media sponsor, rabble.ca. And these groups have all been working very hard to get the word out about the event. So please do find out about these excellent organizations and support their great work. Karen Rodman, who've been working alongside from Just Peace Advocates, will be posting useful links in the chat and helping in the background. So many thanks to Karen for that. It's amazing to see so many people already on the call with us, rallying in support of McGill students today. I want to let everyone know that the chat is open and we are looking forward to hearing from you. So let us know where you're tuning in from. Hi, Robin. Hi, Kirsten. But as always, please keep your comments to each other and to the panelists civil, cordial, and free from racist, sexist, xenophobic, or otherwise harmful commentary. So hi, Najat. Hi, Rushab. Great to see you. So today, after our speakers give their initial remarks, we'll be opening up to questions from journalists. And so for today's event, we are hosting an online press event and rally in support of McGill students who are advocating for Palestinian rights with Roger Waters the day before he rocks out at Montreal's Bell Centre. Thank you, Roger. Thank you for being here. And there's lots of support for this with more than 30 organizations, including groups like the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, the Canadian Federation of Students, and Africa for Palestine, who've endorsed the event. So please do take a social media moment if you can. We'll be active with messages of solidarity from McGill students. So please retweet from the Foreign Policy Institute's account at foreignpoly_c. We're also live streaming to Facebook, and Karen will pop the link into the chat there so you can share that with other people as well. So today, ideally we would have held this event at McGill University itself, but of course, this is not a drill. Tour's strict COVID policy made that impossible. Makes total sense. In our dreams, of course, we would have brought the entire audience from the Bell Centre to McGill's Roddick Gates to really give it to the administration, tell them to stop their anti-Palestinian, anti-democratic moves, and in the words of Pink Floyd, to leave these kids alone. So before we begin, I will offer just some very quick background. This academic year, 5 student associations at Canadian universities passed resolutions supporting elements of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, BDS. In all of these cases, they faced attacks from Canada's network of anti-Palestinian organizations, but the backlash at McGill was particularly fierce. In March, over 70% of students voted for a Palestine solidarity policy, committing the Student Society of McGill University to oppose Israel's system of racial discrimination by divesting from and boycotting, open quote, corporations and institutions complicit in settler colonial apartheid against Palestinians, close quote. The anti-Palestinian group B'nai B'rith called on the McGill administration to cut funding to the student union, and the administration effectively threatened to do so. So it's critical to push back against attempts to squash campaigns that are calling for an end to Canadian complicity in Palestinian dispossession. And I'm very excited for today's event to do just that. Hi, Benoit. Bonjour. Bonjour, Benoit. Benoit from CSN is also here with us today. So first of all, the first speaker we have today gives me great pleasure to introduce from SPHR McGill, Sarah. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much, Bianca. It was a lovely introduction. I'll jump straight in then. So in early March, SPHR McGill, we initiated a student referendum calling for the Student Society of McGill University, known as SMU among McGillians, to adopt a Palestine solidarity policy. This policy, what it did was it commits the SMU to boycott or divest from corporations and institutions that are complicit in settler colonial apartheid against Palestinians, and campaign for McGill University to do the same. The policy also commits the SMU campaign, to campaign for McGill University's public condemnation of Canary Mission and other surveillance or smear campaigns against Palestinian and pro-Palestinian students at McGill. Finally, what it did is the policy commits the SMU to form a Palestine Solidarity Committee, which would have been really important to take a strong public stance in solidarity with Palestinian students and Palestinian Liberation at McGill. But in order to have the Palestine Solidarity Policy included in the SMU Winter 22 referendum, SPHR had the policy signed by over 250 students, and it was approved by SMU election officers. But one day before the referendum vote began, the SMU Judicial Board tried to remove the Palestine Solidarity Policy from the ballot at last minute. Luckily, though, this anti-democratic move was defeated thanks to strong protests by McGill students, and the policy was restored to the ballot. But once voting began on March 15th, SPHR members proceeded to inform McGill students about the importance of the referendum day in and day out. We were tabling and handing out flyers for nearly the entire duration of the campaign time allotted to students. Dedicated SPHR members when we weren't being harassed or being spat on by Zionist student body members, and yes, that did happen multiple times, could be seen raising awareness about the Palestinian struggle against settler colonial Israeli apartheid. Happily, our hard work paid off, and on March 21st, the good news was heard all across campus. The policy had been approved with 71% of the student vote. Also, of all the referendum questions, just to add, ours was the one with by far the least number of abstentions, pointing to the fact that this was the most popular and engaging issue on campus for a while. I didn't know a single person who hadn't heard about it. It took only 2 days for Deputy Provost Fabrice Lebeau, on behalf of the anti-Palestinian McGill administration, to send out an email to students, faculty, and staff threatening to terminate their memorandum of agreement with the Student Association, which would potentially jeopardize collaboration between the Student Association and the McGill administration. Now, according to our sources, the administration was really under pressure at this point because we believe that at least one of the big donors had withdrew significant funding in response to the Palestine Solidarity Policy's amazing success. In addition to openly blackmailing the Student Association, the McGill administration sought to discredit the Palestine Solidarity Policy by announcing the creation of their so-called Initiative Against Islamophobia and Anti-Semitism, and I put that in quotations. Ironically, this initiative, though, which was deliberately launched in the middle of the referendum voting period, it does nothing but increase tensions between Jewish and Muslim students. The Palestinian cause is not a matter of pitting Muslims against Jewish individuals, and especially students, and it's really an issue of human rights. right? And anti-colonial justice. Nothing good will ever come from a colonial institution like McGill weaponizing the issues of anti-Semitism or Islamophobia in order to camouflage its repression of Palestine solidarity activism. As students and Palestine organizers, our response to the administration's email was immediate. In less than 24 hours, SBHR and our allies organized an emergency rally, mobilizing over 200 students in front of the James Administration Building. McGill students who stood and continue to stand in solidarity with Palestine and in defense of student democracy. In the following weeks, SBHR organizers and volunteers were back at the Y intersection, urging students to email the autocratic McGill administration, denouncing their blatant attacks on student democracy. Almost 1,000 emails were sent. Now, you may be wondering, how did the SMU leadership respond to this threat? You know, did they rally students to fight for student democracy or for the independence of the student union that they themselves represent? No. Unfortunately, while SBHR and our fellow students were standing up for the student democracy, the so-called board of directors of the SMU were planning to betray it. On April 22nd, with the encouragement of their corporate lawyers, the SMU board of directors publicly declared that they actually had absolute authority to overturn the result of any democratic student vote. In an unprecedented anti-democratic move, the board therefore refused to ratify and implement the Palestine solidarity policy and are still refusing to ratify the policy to this day in order to appease the McGill administration. As is often the case, when people are faced with tyrannical and repressive institutions, SBHR then resorted to satire. That is, our members published a parody of the SMU Board of Directors. You hear that? Dictators, because that's exactly what we call them. The Board of Directors statement announcing their refusal to implement the policy. This took very little effort, as the original statement itself might well have been a parody in its own right. However, the Board of Directors, which we now commonly refer to, as I mentioned, as the Board of Dictators, then decided to prove our point even further. Instead of accepting that elected representatives can be held accountable and criticized, the Board of Dictators officially suspended SBHR for 105 days, thus depriving us of SMU funding and other resources. In fact, only yesterday, the SMU Executive Committee refused to promote this very event due to our ongoing suspension. To justify this dictatorial measure, the board claimed that our parodies use of terms like dictator, or my favorite, backbones made of jelly, constituted harassment. We sincerely hope that the leaders of our student union will eventually realize they were elected to represent students like me, and I'm sure a lot of other people watching this right now, not to repress us. In the meantime, SBHR and our wonderful volunteers and allies have been implementing the democratically approved Palestine solidarity policy on our own initiative. For example, in April, just before the summer, we launched a campaign to boycott Sabra Hamas due to its connections to Israeli occupation forces and their ongoing atrocities against the Palestinian people. Regardless of the repression by the McGill administration and their accomplices on the SMU Board of Dictators, the stunning 71% student endorsement of the Palestine solidarity policy shows that students support boycott and divestment from settler colonial apartheid, and that they support the Palestinian struggle for freedom, justice, and return. This event right now shows that people all around support boycott and divestment from settler colonial apartheid, and that they support the Palestine struggle for freedom, justice, and return. And just to wrap up, I'd like to thank everyone and all the individuals that made this event possible. Thank you, Bianca, Roger, and everyone else that's here right now in support. We really, really appreciate it. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for your tremendous activism. Really was a big victory at McGill, and you've been through a lot. I hope you are feeling very supported today. We're rallying behind you. And in fact, before we move on, I want to mention just a few more groups who are backing this online event in support of you, of McGill students. These include Academics for Palestine, Concordia, Australians for Palestine, the Canada-Palestine Association, Canadian BDS Coalition, the Canadian Council of Muslim Women in Montreal, the Coalition Against Israeli Apartheid in Victoria, Code Pink, the Concordia Student Union, among many others that I will mention later. So now we're going to be hearing a quick word of solidarity from Benoit Taillefer, who is representing the Montreal Council of the Confédération des syndicats nationaux. Bienvenue, Benoit.
Bonjour, merci beaucoup. D'abord, juste rappeler que je ne parle pas au nom de la CSN, mais bien au nom du Comité de solidarité internationale du Conseil central Montréal métropolitain, CSN. Alors, évidemment, à titre de membre de ce comité-là, je milite activement avec BDS Québec depuis plusieurs années. Quand je dis moi, ça comprend aussi mes collègues du comité. Et évidemment, nous sommes solidaires avec le peuple palestinien et ce, depuis toujours. On dénonce toutes les formes d'exactions commises par les Israéliens. On dénonce évidemment l'apartheid et l'occupation illégale des territoires palestiniens. Et en terminant, je suis bref, mais en terminant, évidemment, on est solidaire aussi avec le syndicat des étudiants de McGill et vous avez tout notre appui. Je vous remercie de votre écoute.
I'm on mute. Merci. Merci beaucoup, Benoit. Merci au CSN. Merci pour la solidarité. It's great that CSN supports the Palestinian cause and McGill students fighting for Palestinian liberation on their campus. Merci beaucoup pour la solidarité. Before we move on, I want to mention a few more groups who are backing this event. These include the Edmonton Small Press Association, the Global Peace Alliance Society, Greater Toronto for BDS, HR4A, Saskatchewan, Jews for Palestinian Right of Return, Labor for Palestine, Oakville Palestinian Rights Association, and Mouvement Québécois pour la Paix, among others. All right, so now we're going to be hearing from Roger Waters. Roger is a singer, songwriter, and composer. He's the co-founder of the rock band Pink Floyd. He's currently on a tour titled This Is Not a Drill, and he'll be playing at the Bell Center tomorrow night. It's great to have you with us today. Welcome, Roger.
Well, thank you very much. It's really cool to be here. I was listening with great interest to everything that Sarah had to say and made a couple of notes while I was listening to that. 70% is a crushing defeat for B'nai B'rith and for the Zionist movement in general all over the world. For that 70% of the students at a great university like McGill should come forward and bother to vote in for a cause like this is quite remarkable. Not least because it shows how things have moved since I got involved in this struggle. And I was a latecomer to the struggle. I've only been involved since 2006 in the struggle of the Palestinian people for basic human and political rights. So it took me a while to wake up and figure out that there was something wrong with the picture. In fact, what it took was for my agent to, in the middle of a tour I was doing of Europe at the time, "You're looking confused, Bianca." No, it doesn't matter. We could have a nice chat about your confusion, but maybe that's not really the time. Anyway, in the middle of a European tour, they threw in a gig in Tel Aviv, and I just went, yeah, okay. It was sort of in the middle of a week when we weren't working much, and then it all started. I started to get emails from concerned citizens from all over the world, but particularly from a man called Omar Barghouti, who was part of a very new organization in Palestinian civil society, which was the beginning of the BDS movement. And on the basis of advice from him and in conversations with Omar, I decided to cancel my gig in Tel Aviv. It was in Haikon Stadium, which, as I'm sure you all know, is built on Palestinian dead people. And in consequence, it's not the best place to jump up and down and shout Ra. So I canceled that gig, but I did do a gig in Israel, and which was at a place called Neve Shalom in Hebrew, or Awat Asalam, I think is the name in Arabic. It's an agricultural community where the people who farm the land, they grow chickpeas mainly, but they are of all denominations. There are Jews, Druze, Christians, Muslims, atheists, whoever, and all their children go to school together, and they teach brotherhood and sisterhood, and they teach us a sense of community. We did a gig there. It was incredibly successful. There were about 60,000 people there. What I hadn't realized at the time was that all of those people, without exception, were Jewish Israelis. They were mainly young people, but they were all Jewish and they were all Israelis. So, and they were very, very enthusiastic, and they knew all my work and blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the show, I made a little speech where I said something like, it behoves you, this generation of young Israelis, to make peace with your neighbors and blah, blah, blah. And they went from, we love Pink Floyd, to, what the fuck is he talking about? We're not going to do that. Hit the guys, what? And they were completely silent from that moment on. And I thought, wow, this was a huge revelation to me. So I came back the next year, and I bushed around in Palestine for a bit, and I visited Jerusalem, and I went up to the north to Jenin, and all the way back down the Jordan River, down the valley, and whatever, and spoke to a lot of people. And two things stand out immediately. Now, one was I had a conversation with one of the elders in the refugee camp in Jenin. I feel quite overcome with emotion now, because one of the things that he said to me, sitting there with his worry beads, you know, he said, the young people here, teenagers in Jenin, were here during the Israeli invasion and occupation and massacre of 2002. And he said, they're now teenagers. They've discovered a new way of ending their lives. They commit suicide by walking towards a checkpoint with a pair of scissors or a knife in their hand. And then the Israelis oblige them by shooting them dead on the spot. And it's becoming a thing, and we're losing lots of young people. This was in 2006 or 7. So by now I'm completely hooked. But the other thing that happened in that thing was I was invited to speak at a film school. So we're coming back to further education. And there were about 20 teachers, professors there, and about 100 kids, all learning about film, I suppose. And they were exactly the same. Oh, it's him, he's from Pink Floyd. Oh, this is so exciting, and blah, blah, blah. Until I said, have any of you seen a movie called Heart of Jenin? And it was exactly the same response. And my visit lasted about another 3 minutes. And then I left because I realized that they were completely disinterested in anything that I might have to say about anything up to that. So that was interesting. I don't know why I went back there. Yes, I do. And it's for this reason. That was a fledgling organization then, BDS. It's not now, okay? Even more recently, 5 or 6 years ago, you could not use the word apartheid with reference to the Zionist agenda. You couldn't do it. It was absolutely verboten. You could not get away with it. Now, it's impossible to have any conversation about the Zionist project in Palestine without using the word apartheid, because it has become generally accepted by anyone with a IQ above room temperature, or anyone who has any knowledge at all of the situation in the occupied territories or anything like that. So I'm glad you mentioned the words Benai and Brith, because I remember those arseholes from the last time I was in Canada, and they would be outside the gigs demonstrating and try and get people to not come to my shows and to join them in the belief that I'm an anti-Semite and that I'm this and that and blah, blah, blah. I pity them. I pity them now, because they are clinging to the last shreds of any attachment to their fascist belief in Jewish supremacy in the Holy Land. And it is fascist, it's a fascist belief, which is weird given the whole thing of the Holocaust and what happened in the 40s and so on and so forth, which we all know the story and of course was awful and appalling and horrible, but it does bear, and I know you're not supposed to say this, it's hugely politically incorrect to draw comparisons between the Holocaust and what's going on with the Palestinians now. So I won't do it because I don't want to get my hands slapped. Stop it. If I was in McGill University, obviously the Board of Governors or whatever would call me and say, Roger, bend over and give me 6 of the best with some old-fashioned cane. Well, I'm not. So, all right, I'll move on. What else did? But the list is growing, and the platform upon which B'nai B'rith and the settler colonialist Zionist movement of the Israeli government stands is becoming, how they manage to stand on it, they must have to stand on tiptoe to find a space on that platform, because the platform has diminished until it's almost disappeared, and it's going to disappear. It will no longer be there, in spite of the actions of rich donors to McGill University putting pressure on the Board of Governors or whoever the governing people are and saying, you have to overturn this democratic vote for that gives 70% of the students gave support to the, who are these people? The Palestinian people. And a couple of our donors don't like that result. So why don't we forget all about democracy and the people having a voice and all of that? Let's just shovel that to one side and overrule them. Why don't we send the students who are organizing it to prison or to a labor camp or something? No, you can't do that. People would take notice, blah, blah. But that's what's going on, because what they're doing is insane, absolutely insane, to sanction Sarah and the rest of the people who, using only fair means, the fair means being conversation and persuading people and educating people, people like me who didn't know anything about it at the turn of the millennium. I had no idea really what was going on. I thought, Israel, isn't that people in sandals going around and, you know, farming? And aren't they socialist? And aren't they this? And don't they care about a community and all that stuff? And of course, I was completely wrong. It's not about that at all. It was about a bunch of, you know, Europeans back in the middle of the 19th century deciding that they were going to take over this piece of land and kick out anybody that lived there and take it over for themselves as their own little Kabul. That's what it's about. So you have to educate people. Am I right in this? Was it at McGill that there was an oil painting on the stairs, or was that at another university in Montreal or somewhere? There was a big deal about a painting and that they were trying to get rid of the B'nai B'riths and Jewish students of the thing. I can remember it. If it wasn't McGill, help me out. It was
York University.
York. It was a York University. I'm sorry, York University, but this does you great credit, you students there, because you stood up and defended this painting that was on the stairs. It was a painting, I remember it, I can see it, and from memory, I'll describe it. It was a painting, it was a landscape, and in this landscape, there were olive trees. Hang on, I might need to read my writing, is not easy. There were olive trees, there was a Palestinian flag, there was a bulldozer, and there was a chap standing in the foreground with his hand behind his back. And in his hand behind his back, he was holding a stone. So he was obviously resisting the bulldozing of these 100-year-old olive trees that were behind him in the background. Okay. I think the students of York won that battle, but I don't know, perhaps somebody on the chat could let me know about that. But it was, yeah, that's super important to me. Also, last week, 8th and 9th, I played at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto. The guy who owns that building, and I can't remember his name, tried to ban me from ever performing in Canada. on these grounds, i.e. he was part of the Israeli lobby, and he said, you will never play in this building again, because he tried to stop me there. Well, I just played there 2 nights last week. So, all right. So, and I've no idea what his name is, but obviously, you know, he's a bigot and he's wrong about all of this, or he's right about it, which simply means that he, unlike Bianca and Sarah and Benoit and all of us here in this community chat room, he, unlike us, does not believe in human rights, freedom of the press, liberty, democracy, any of those things. He couldn't give a shit about any of that, just like the Israeli government, who don't care about any of those things. That is what sets them apart from us. And that is what sets Sarah apart from, I can't believe that you said this, Sarah. I really can't. You said that some of the people lobbying on behalf of the Zionist project spat at you, spat on the students. Well, as anybody who lives in Montreal and is old enough to remember, I famously spat at somebody in the Olympic Stadium in 1977. And it was from that like egg of ire that I developed the idea of writing the wall and building that thing between the audiences. I only bring that up because it happened here. And I remember it. I don't remember spitting on the person fondly. I'm deeply ashamed of that action, and so should these arseholes be ashamed of spitting at people in support of their appalling claims that the Zionist project has anything on its side, because it doesn't. There is nothing that you can say about the Zionist project that is defensible. It's all based on absolute lies. The main lie is that there was nobody living in Palestine. You know, that's the great, I've forgotten her name now. Who's the Israeli prime minister? Golda Meir. Golda Meir was very fond of saying that. And they even developed a slogan, a land without people for a people without a land. You lying piece of shit. You knew that was nonsense at the time when you said it. And these people who are repeating it now, they know it's nonsense as well. We all, the whole world has seen through your bullshit. We all know that the Palestinian people have been there for century after century after century after. They are the ones that planted all those 100-year-old, 200-year-old, 400-year-old olive trees that you are uprooting. And in fact, 10% of them were Jewish. Many faiths were represented in historic Palestine. So up until 1948, it was a sort of functioning, developing part of this planet, Earth, which we all love. And well, love it or not, it's all we've got. So we have to protect it in every way that we can. And allowing these divisive, murderous, warmongering ideologies to run rampant, not just over Palestine, but over a lot of the rest of the earth as well, does none of us any favors. And those of us who do believe in human rights and the law and democracy and blah, 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 and the whole list of things, and love for one another, all agree on that now. And our voice is getting louder and louder. This choir that is here on this screen now is raising its voice, and we are singing louder and louder and louder. And we will prevail, and we shall overcome in this struggle against the governing bodies of McGill University and anybody else who says one thing and does the other. If Mr. and Mrs. McGill, you really believe in democracy and human rights and freedom and liberty and blah, 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 and love, you will stop doing what you're doing, and you will remove the sanction from the Students' Union at McGill University and from our Sarah here. And you should go and huddle somewhere in a room and go, you know what? We made a huge error there. And we have no platform to stand on. There is no way that we can talk ourselves out of this ignominy. It is ignominious what we did. And we're very, very sorry, and we won't do it again. And I think that's all I have to say on the subject at the moment. I'll answer questions, obviously. I could sit here and answer questions until tomorrow night when I have to go on stage.
That's so wonderful. Thank you so much, Roger. That was awesome. We are indeed raising our voices. It was just utterly rousing to hear from you. And I can see that our audience are very excited. And thank you for your stories and for your moral clarity and for your passion for Palestinian liberation. And for taking a moment out of this whirlwind tour that you're on to stand in solidarity with these students here in Montreal who are demanding an end to Canadian complicity with Israel's crimes. Thank you for using your fame to rally behind these students too, who are doing this boots to the ground organizing. And on that note, actually the note of organizing, I just want to quickly mention a few more groups who are supporting today's event. Oper Carleton, Palestine House, Peace Alliance Winnipeg, Palestinian Youth Movement Montreal, the Parti Communiste du Canada, Regina Peace Council, Samidou Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network, Science for Peace, the Teaching and Research Assistants at Concordia or TRAC, the YCL, the Independent Jewish Voices Montreal. Thanks to all of these groups for your support. And that concludes our presentations for this afternoon. So thank you to Sarah, thank you to Benoit, thank you to Roger. We will be hearing a final word right at the end from Roger and Sarah. But for now, we're going to be moving on to the next part of this afternoon's program, which is a Q&A with some journalists. So our first question is from Charles Eric at La Presse. So go ahead, Charles Eric. Please do turn on your camera, switch on your microphone, and ask your question.
Hi, do you understand? Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry for the bad English, but yes, I'd like to know what will be the minimum condition for you to go back to Israel one day, and are you optimistic that it will happen one day?
It would be the end of the occupation for all the people who live in the Holy Land to have equal political and civil rights, irrespective of their ethnicity or their nationality or anything else. I'm a great believer in democracy, and so that's all it would be. I've already said that when the occupation wall comes down and they have equal rights for everybody in the region, I can't think of anything I'd rather do than go back and play to a segregated audience. As I said, the only time I played there wasn't a single Palestinian in the audience, not one, because they're not allowed to travel. They can't use the roads. There's no way they could have got there. They would have been arrested. They would probably have been shot if they tried to get there. So, yeah.
And maybe a next question, a little one. Will you address a little speak during the show tomorrow about that issue?
I've no idea. Well, I do speak a couple of times during the show, and I never know what I'm going to talk about really, except I talk a little bit about one of the songs that I sing at that point. But I find myself moved by being in the presence of however many people it is, 15, 16,000 people. And I feel the sense of community that I've already described here, being in this room with Bianca and Sarah, right? And you now. And I feel this sense of community, and there's a great feeling of love, and there will be in that room tomorrow night as well. So whether I bring up Palestine, I don't know, but I spent this morning writing text along with Sean Evans, who is my collaborator in all things visual for the show. And we're writing about a song called Deja Vu and what goes up on the thing. And we mention the words occupation. And when we do, make no mistake, we're talking about occupation in general, but very specifically as well, the occupation of the territories in Palestine that were occupied by Israel illegally in 1967 and are being settled now illegally by Israeli settlers now, as we speak. Every day it goes on. They're evicting people from their homes. Shejara, as we know, happened recently. They're demolishing homes, they're killing people, they're murdering journalists. It's beyond all imagination how badly the Israeli government and the Israeli people are behaving. So it probably will come up.
Thank you, Roger.
Thank you so much for your question, Charles-Éric. We'll now be hearing from Yves Leclerc from the Journal de Québec.
Oh, Mr. Waters, I remember when you played on the Plaine d'Abraham a couple of years ago in Quebec. As an artist, Roger, people love you a lot for the music that you write, and they don't necessarily agree with your political views. Is it tough for you to go into that direction and to deal with the fans that didn't like or heard from you about the political things?
No, absolutely not. You can't expect everybody to be right about everything all the time. And like we've been talking about McGill and the Board of Governors, they're just wrong. The Zionist settler thing about Palestine is just wrong. It's just against everything that grown people believe to be an agreeable thing. Like the law, we started developing the law back in 1215 on the banks of the River Thames at Runnymede. And it came together, and maybe there were other places that came, but I'm sure there will. You know, I'm sure the Arab world was thinking about these. So were the Chinese. But eventually we arrive at things where we sort of go, well, people should have rights under a kind of universal law, and we subscribe to those things. So the fact that some people, like the McGill governing body, don't subscribe to that idea, or don't subscribe to the idea that the people should have a voice, or don't subscribe to the idea that Indigenous people should have a voice. In fact, I'm glad you brought that up. I tell you, I will be seeing tomorrow is Phil Fontaine, who I met back in Toronto when we were demonstrating outside the courthouse in Toronto a few years ago about Chevron and Ecuador, and when I was working with Steve Donziger and all of that. And so I see a huge connection between the Wet'suwet'en and, you know, on the First Nation, all the First Nation people in Canada. I've followed them, Dogwood, and a few of these things to see the fights that are going on, mainly about tar sands and about pipelines and about all those issues. And I see the wonderful response from the Canadian people who are resisting. You know, and I'm deeply impressed by it, but I connect them with, I live in Long Island, New York. I have close connections with the Shinnecock Nation there. I have close connections with the Mapuche in southern Chile and southern Argentina. I have great friends who are Aboriginal in Australia. There is this community of thinking in the Indigenous peoples all over the world, and they're quite rightly and wisely saying to us, hey, our belief is that you Europeans fucked it all up when you came here and killed us all and tried to steal everything. And they're right. And we have a huge amount to learn from them. So Phil, I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow night, and Kathleen, but we do have a great deal to learn from the way most Indigenous peoples' relationship is with Mother Earth. Because what we Europeans have done is just wherever we go, and I'm talking about Chevron and Exxon, obviously big oil is a big part of it, is we just try and steal as much as we can and get out without getting our hands dirty, and leaving totally Ecuador, the rainforests of Ecuador. I've been a bit involved in the fight of the Indigenous people there against Chevron. And we make a little bit of progress from time. They throw billions of dollars at us to try and get us banned or thrown away, just like the donors at McGill are throwing at the Board of Governors, saying, we're not going to give you any more dollars if you don't do as you're told, you naughty, naughty people. And they get away with it sometimes for a bit, but they can't get away with it forever, because the fact is that we, the people, not just our Indigenous brothers and sisters, but all working people, certainly all over the world, we are very, very many. And we're sick of it. And you are very, very few. How you've got away with it for as long as you have is mystery. Except it's not, because you're really good at propaganda and you're really good at owning newspapers and at owning TV stations. You know, Rupert Murdoch, oh my God, what a wonderful man. You know, how clever he is to buy television stations and tell lies and say, this is all right. Now, of course, you can't make the sums add up at the end of the month because we don't pay you enough for you to be able to pay your bills and live a decent life. You know, we're fighting like anything to keep the minimum wage below $15. Below $15. You can't live, nobody could live on $15 an hour in the United States where I come from. And yet they're fighting to keep the minimum wage below that. They're keeping everybody starved of any kind of a life. And also they want to starve you of a sense of love in a community. Well, all the people I've just mentioned are saying, no, I love my brothers and sisters. I love my brothers and sisters all over the world, irrespective of their nationality or ethnicity or politics or blah, 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 blah. We're all in this together. But you're not in it with us. You're the few, and you are screwing everything up. You are destroying this planet. Greta Thunberg was right. She is right. Everybody in the green movements, they're right. We are right and you are wrong. And you're getting away with it because you have a huge amount of power. In the United States particularly, you buy the politicians. That's the substitute for the democracy where 70% of the students at McGill University said one thing and you said, no, we're not doing that. We don't care what you think. Or we don't care that 70% of you think one thing, because this bloke over here has got 100 quid in his pocket and he's giving it to us to say, no, you can't say that.
Yeah.
It's crazy, obviously. I'll shut up again.
Thank you so much, Yves, for your question. Did you have a quick follow-up?
No, I'll let others ask some questions, maybe at the end if there's a little bit of time.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Thank you so much. Okay, next up, we're going to be hearing from Stephanie Davoli from rabble.ca. Welcome, Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, everyone, for putting on this event, and thank you, Roger, for being here. So my question on behalf of rabble.ca is, what kind of support would you like to see for the students at McGill who feel like their freedom of speech has been violated and feel that they have been unfairly at the receiving end of this backlash? What would you like for it to be done for them?
You mean for Sarah?
For Sarah and everyone that's kind of dealt with it.
We get the other side of the coin being, oh, I'm a Jewish student and they're being so mean to me and I feel so uncomfortable here. You had the same opportunity to speak at the debates and to encourage students to vote for your side of the argument, as Sarah did, encouraging her things. But for these students, well, obviously, they should be treated to equal human rights under the law as anyone else, and not denied their human rights simply because they're going up against the Zionist, colonialist, fascist settler movement that is happening in the occupied territories in Palestine every day as we speak, with the murder of the journalists like last week. So that's all, just to be treated equally under the law, nothing else. It's really simple.
I think Sarah would like to contribute as well. Sarah, rather, actually, it's pronounced Sarah.
Yeah, super quickly. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can support students, but the biggest one is to speak up, you know, to use whatever platform you have, whether you work as a journalist or someone in the media, whether you're a student yourself, and share, to talk to other, when someone says, oh, I went to Israel, correct them, you know, or talk to them about it, engage in conversations, because some people really just don't know, right? And just defend against censorship, and there's so many different things you can do.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Do you have any follow-up questions, Stephanie?
Not at the moment. Thank you both for your responses.
Wonderful. Next up, we're going to be hearing from Martin Fogg at Pivot, Quebec. Welcome, Martin.
Bonjour tout le monde. Hi, Roger. Thank you for everything that you're doing. I know that you have been supporting veterans as well for many years. You have a lot of experience there. There is a tradition of organizing and activism amongst veterans in the United States. It's been going on at least since the Vietnam War. Now here, we don't have that, but there's this tiny whisper that is going on, and like veterans that are trying to organize, see that like the title of your tour says it. This is not a drill, and so they know something's going on. They know we're in dire times. They want to organize, but there's still there's this little something that's still missing. What would you tell a veteran that knows that everything is going on is wrong, but still needs a little nudge or a little something to make him want to on the hand?
Well, I'm so glad you asked me that.
I'm a veteran myself.
Are you? Okay. Where did you serve?
Afghanistan and Bosnia.
Okay, interesting. So you're a NATO grunt.
Yeah.
For NATO, right?
Former.
What? Former.
Yeah.
Former. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a fascinating story. There are tables. I'm not. Do you know? I wish I'd thought of this before I came on this program, because I'm not sure what's happening in Canada. Every single gig in the United States that I'm doing another 38 or so gigs in the United States. There are Veterans for Peace tables in the foyer of everything when they're handing out literature and they're there, and there are presents. And there are 20 of them coming to every show. And this has all been organized through a friend of mine who I've only known for about a year, called Doug Zachary, who's a wonderful man and full of energy, and a great activist and whatever. So I'm interested now that I've spoken to you, I shall be fascinated to see whether any local organization here is being given space in the foyer and to distribute their literature and so on and so forth, because they should. One of my old friends he was injured in Afghanistan, came to the show last night or the night before in Boston. He's called Greg Galeazzi, and he's got no legs and he's got one arm that works and whatever. And weirdly enough, I don't know why I'm telling you this, except that he's a close friend of mine now, but he's just finished training as a doctor. He's now Dr. Greg Galeazzi at Harvard Medical School. So he got, can you imagine how hard that is? I have no idea how he's done it, but he has done. So I have many friends who are veterans, and we just have to stick together and we have to tell the truth. It all goes back to, Oliver Stone and Born on the 4th of July and blah, blah, blah. There is always a place for resistance to the war machine. So I'm not blaming you for having gone off and bombed the Serbs or whatever you did, or Afghanistan or whatever. We've almost completely destroyed. We almost together completely destroyed Afghanistan. But we've been trying to do that since the 1830s. Certainly the British have been trying to do it. And we won't, because they are an extraordinarily resilient people. And however much we go and interfere with their internal politics, like the CIA mainly in Afghanistan, they will survive. But what a miserable life for the Afghanistan. They're living there. They're being sanctioned now by the United States, the country who's largely responsible for the destruction of the country, because they are obviously the power behind NATO. So they're the most extreme version of how bad it is to go and interfere in the internal politics of other countries and impose your will so that you can grow the empire. I'm sorry, I'll stop talking again. Thank you for
no.
Thank you so much, Martin, for your question. Follow up?
I do have a bit of a follow-up, yeah. But in regards to issues like Palestine. Sometimes veterans, they have this, they don't know how they could get involved, like what contribution they could bring. What would be your message to them?
Join BDS, join the BDS movement, or any, support the students at McGill. Do it. All you have to do is look at it, help educate others, because I was listening to what Bianca was saying about some people don't know. She's so right. But it's like I was talking about the Wet'suwet'en, and the Shinnecock Nation and the Mapuche and the Aboriginal. Most people who are not indigenous to countries have no idea of the history because it's not taught to our children in schools at all. In fact, the powers that be, the ruling class, the governments, do everything they can to make sure that we never learn about the real histories of these countries and what happened and how unbelievably disgusting the Europeans have been all over the world in their hegemonic actions everywhere, including Serbia. I don't mean to, single you out, but that was what? You bombs? Why? What did they talk? Of course, nobody knows because that history is not taught. Nobody knows what happened in Kosovo. Nobody knows about the internal politics and the breakdown of the Yugoslavian Federation. And nobody knows anything about it because Rupert Murdoch is telling the story, and he's telling the story on behalf of the US government and the Australian government and the government. So they tell their one bit of the story, but it's not the truth, not even close to being the reality of it, or Libya or any of the other countries they've destroyed. In spite of the fact that that four-star general, whose name I can never remember, was told by Wolfowitz back in whenever it was, the turn of the millennium, he said, look, here's a piece of paper. It's a memo. It's an internal memo at the Pentagon. We are going to invade and destroy 7 countries in the next 5 years. Libya, Iraq. And the list went on. Syria, blah, 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 blah. Iran was at the end of the list. And they're working on Iran. And they will go on until they've tried to destroy Iran. That's, how many people is that? 100 million people or something? It's the Persians. They are actually a very old civilization. They invented mathematics, for God's sake. You're just a bunch of settled colonial upstarts. You've been quite good at some forms of technology, but look where it's got us. Silicon Valley now is trying to censor all content on the internet, and they're working together with the government to do it. They're constantly inviting fucking Zuckerberg over to the CIA, to Langley, or to the Pentagon or whatever, to sit down around a table and say, what should we do now? And to alter the narrative so that people will go on supporting this bullshit. The murdering of brown people in foreign countries. What for? Well, obviously for profit for us. Obviously, that's what it's for, the arms industry, that's what it's for. It's to steal money from poor people and put it into the pockets of Elon Musk. And we need, we can, don't get me started.
Thank you, Roger. We have one last journalist, Paul Salvatore from the Palestine Chronicle. Welcome, Paul. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you so much, Bianca. And thank you, Roger. It's an honor to be able to speak with you. And
I read you.
Oh, do you? All right, nice. That's especially a very special honor. Thank you so much. I thought your story was fascinating, troubling but fascinating about the response of your audiences in Israel suddenly changing when you ask them to think about Palestine. And I'm reminded of how that kind of speaks to how niceness or graciousness, as it were, is not a sure indication of care for the oppressed. And I think that the lobby is using that to that sort of exterior to distract people from what's going on, including Israel being an inviting place for artists. So I just want to ask you if you could, either one of these questions, if you could answer, would be great. So if you have a message for musicians or artists more broadly who are thinking about or have been invited to perform or showcase their work in Israel, and or how you feel music can be a tool or means to fight Israeli apartheid.
You know, I've got a feeling that I may have to pull something up here because I wrote a short piece
Okay.
a few years ago, or a couple of years ago, and it's called The Road to Damascus.
Okay.
And it's a parable, as you would expect something called The Road to Damascus to be. And I'm just going to move this down a bit and see if I can find it, because I really want to, because it absolutely addresses your question. I might have to put my bins on. I know we've got to 4 o'clock and we're past it, but if you could bear with me, I think this is really important. I may have to search for it here. I'm searching now. The Road to Damascus. Enter. Ah, I found it. Okay. So I can't see you anymore, but I can see this piece of text, and maybe you can see me. Can you still see me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Here we go. So I've never been in a conversation with Nick Cave, who is an artist, but there was an exchange in a magazine, in various magazines, when he went and played in Tel Aviv a couple of years ago, or maybe a bit before, and he accused both me and another English musician called Brian Eno of being cowards because we had written to him saying there's a boycott, a cultural boycott, please don't go and play in Tel Aviv. And he called us bullies. He said they are bullies and cowards for having suggested this to him, suggesting that he not ignore the boycott. So I wrote this little piece and I'm going to read it now. And so in the first sentence, it mentions an Aussie bloke. Well, the secret is that Nick Cave is the Aussie bloke. Here we go. The Road to Damascus. So, sorry, I nearly went into an Aussie accent. So me and this Aussie bloke are walking down the road on the way to a gig. Just as we get there, we see these heavily armed soldiers on the other side of the road knocking this Arab bloke to the ground, kneeling on him, kicking him in the head and beating him with their rifle butts. I cross over to remonstrate with them. The soldiers tell me to fuck off or they'll arrest me. Are you all right? I asked the bloke. Daft question, really. Can I help? Yes, he says. You are musicians, yes? Yes, I reply. They have stolen our land, he says. We are resisting them. There is a cultural boycott. Please don't do a gig here. As he is dragged away towards the paddy wagon, he tosses a small, round metal badge in my direction. I return to the other side of the road where the Aussie has been watching events unfold. Did you see that? I say. Yeah, bummer, he replies. Come on, we've got a gig to do. No, I say. There's a cultural boycott. That Arab bloke is a victim. The soldiers are perpetrators. We have a moral duty to stand with the victim. Don't you try to bully me, you shameful, cowardly pommy bastard, says the Aussie, and pushes past me into the gig. I reach down into the dust, retrieve the BDS badge, and pin it to my lapel.
Wow.
All right, so that's it.
That's amazing.
You know, fuck him. What a prick. How dare he call me a bully? And
Yes.
anyway, there we go.
That's incredible. No, thank you so much, Roger. I think that's sort of the, I think, misconception among those of us who support BDS is that we are these bullies when in fact it's the total opposite. it's militant, but it is coming from a place of compassion, and justice. And I think that's, part of the challenge to get more people on board as much as it's growing. So thank you.
You're so right, Paul. And the thing is that the reason it's growing is because to express your love for fellow human beings in the face of this calumny is actually a great feeling, and it's a really attractive thing to people. And it's so people get attracted once they know what's going on, which comes down to, Bianca talking about education and how we need to spread the word and educate people. Once people know, they go, you know what, I cannot, what is it? Well, I have to cross over.
Yeah.
To stand by silent and indifferent is the greatest sin of all.
Yes, exactly.
That's all.
Yes.
And they're right. And it's deeply moving to join the choir and to sing at the top of your lungs as loud as you can.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
That's all.
Thank you so much, Paul, for your question. Thank you, thank you. Thank you to all the journalists who participated in today's press event. This has been awesome. And before we end, we're just going to hear a quick word from Sarah, and from Roger, and then we will conclude. So I'd like to welcome Sarah back.
Thanks, Bianca and Roger. That was beautiful, honestly. Amazing. I have a story similar to yours. I was walking down the streets in Palestine, and I'm Palestinian, but I was raised abroad my whole life. My grandparents were, they fled during the first occupation, and they were very young. And I was walking down the streets and I was speaking in English with my younger siblings. And an old man sitting on the side with his beads, same as you, pulled me aside and said, "You're Arab, right? You're Palestinian." And I was like, "Yes." And he was like, "Then speak the language of Palestinians and we will go on forever." And just all that to say that no matter what happens, no matter what is thrown at us, we will always resist and we will always keep fighting. And the support that we get from you, Roger, and everyone else it moves us forward, it reinvigorates us, and it gives us energy to go on. And that, despite everything, we're still able to organize, we're still able to fight, and that's really important. Thanks to everyone who came here. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Roger.
No, oh, sorry. I was sort of not miles away. I was listening to Sarah though. And she kind of said it all. I think we've covered as much ground as we can really in this webinar. But it's very moving to be on webinars like this. And I think what I just said in that last speech about heart and love and all of that really says it all. I'm sort of in danger of being overcome with emotion because it means so much to me. Our platform is tiny, but our message is huge. Our platform, you just write on it, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Paris, 1948, full stop. That's it. It's tiny. You can write it on a cigarette paper, but it's huge. It says everything really about it. So we have to apply that to Palestine and the Palestinian people and say, we will never go away. We will support you till the end of this story. And the Jewish people, we will support you too. But this bullshit has got to stop.
Thank you, Roger. Yes, it has got to stop. Freedom for Palestine. It's been such an honor to take part in this powerful discussion, very insightful discussion. I've learned a lot. Thanks to Roger. Thanks to Benoit for your tremendous solidarity. Thanks to Sarah for your incredible activism and resilience in the face of these threats from the administration of the university that you attend. My 5-year-old is about to return from his daycare, and he recently watched Roger Waters' Netflix special. And so if he sees him with his mama, on the screen, he's going to start lobbying for tickets to go to the concert. So we'd better wrap. It's been a great event. Thank you so much to our panelists, Sarah, Benoit, Roger, and thank you to the journalists for your excellent questions. I look forward to your stories. If you like events like these, please do consider making a donation to the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute at foreignpolicy.ca/donation. And again, thanks to our brilliant speakers, to Karen Rodman from Just Peace Advocates, who's been helping behind the scenes, helping to pull support together for this event. And thanks to our co-sponsors, Paju, Just Peace Advocates, Rabble.ca, SPHR, McGill, and to our audience for joining us. That's it for our program today. Peace.